today, but the main catching up process, and China the last 20 years. What was characteristic for these countries in comparison to, say, Latin America, in comparison to, say, Eastern Europe and Africa in particular? What was the main feature of these economies? It was rising wages. It was the participation of everyone, of the mass of the people, in the progress of the economy. This was much more important than anything else. And this produced a process where the corporations were eager to invest, where you had a process driven by investment and not a process that had to be driven by other forces or had to be driven by kind of deregulation, as we have learned in the last 30 years, or by flexibility of wages. And the lesson is, overall, the lesson is very simple. You see, you have three very important prices in the economy, three important macroeconomic prices. What are these three macroeconomic prices? The first one is interest rates. My example has shown, and I have mentioned it, who drives interest rates? Well, it's the central bank and no one else. It's just the central bank. Interest rates are set by the central bank. There is no market process that leads to interest rates. It's always a process that's clearly driven by the central bank or the monetary authority, however you call it. They are setting the interest rate. This is extremely important. And they're setting the interest rate. They have to set the interest rate according to the investment development. And they have to come down, as they did all over the world in the last years, with interest rate dramatically, even to zero, if there is no investment dynamics. What is the second price? The second important price for any economy in the world, developed and developing alike, is wages. It may be the most important one. So who is driving wages? And my answer is, it cannot be the market. Because the market does not drive wages in the right direction. You have to have an intervention of the government. You have to have a certain process of the government where the government is pushing wages in a certain direction. Look at China again. China, how did China achieve to have strongly rising wages? And wages were rising in China in the last, I just looked at it, last 10 years, at least 15 years, by more than 10% annually, the nominal wages, and the real wages also by 6-7% annually. How was it driven? Well, it was driven by the government by adjusting the minimum wage permanently upwards and aggressively upwards. Everybody would have said, every good economist, or 99% of all good economists in the world would have said, this is a disaster if the government intervenes into the labor market in that way, it will destroy the economy. No. It brought about a dramatic success, the biggest success that any single country ever had after the Second World War, the biggest success. And it was done by a communist party, imagine. Market economy driven by a communist party.
The trade union role.
Excuse me?
Trade union role in raising wages.
Yeah, the trade union role depends on your institutional setup. If you have strong unions, it's okay, then leave it to the unions. But everywhere we have weakened the unions. In Europe, we have weakened the unions to an extent that they're no longer able to do that. And then you need a government. If, as in the 60s, the unions are strong and are doing that by themselves, okay, no problem. Then you can have social partnership, or however you call it. You can have tripartite agreements, whatever you have. But you cannot deprive the unions of the power to do that, to set the wage accordingly in the right way, and then hope that some miracle market mechanism will bring it about. It will not bring it about. As we have seen, the wage rate is falling all the time. And what is the third price? I come to the third price. I did not mention that explicitly. It's my main topic over the last 50 years, so I did not go into that today. Well, the third price is the exchange rate. The third price is the exchange rate. These are the three important macroeconomic prices. And again, we know from evidence that we have done at UNCTAD and elsewhere, we know we cannot leave the exchange rate to the market. And again, look at what the Asian countries have done in comparison to many other very bad experiences. Look at, if you compare Latin America to Asia, you see one principle. And the principle is never leave the exchange rate to the market. But this produces, obviously, for a developing country, a small developing country, a big, big problem. Because it cannot have its own exchange rate and not leave it to the market. That's very difficult. And that's why the most important thing, although I didn't go into that today, because I've done it so often, is that we create a monetary order. What we need is a monetary system for the world as a whole that was a system comparable to the system that was created after the Second World War, immediately after the Second World War in the small village of Bretton Woods. We need a system like that, in particular for developing countries to integrate into the world market. Because developing countries, small and open developing countries are not able to steer the exchange rate in a way that Europe can do it or the US can do it. The US can live in a state of benign neglect to the exchange rate. A developing country cannot do that. But that is why the developing countries have to fight hard for a monetary system, a new monetary system that integrates them and gives them the stability that they need. Because the one big mistake that we have done over the last 50 years, and at UNCTAD we have been looking into that very closely, is that on the one hand, we urge the developing countries to open their markets, open your markets to the full. Full freedom of trade, full freedom of capital flow. But it doesn't work. Look at Latin America. The Latin American experiences are dramatic. Brazil is the outstanding example. Brazil was time and again, it was overawed, so to say, by international speculation. By the way, Israel as well. Israel had a time when the shekel was really an object of international speculation, and Israel got into big, big problems because of the appreciation of the currency. Because what the speculation does, it appreciates currencies where the interest rates are a bit higher than in the rest of the world. And this has to be avoided. But this means the third price also needs government intervention. So if you talk about the market economy is a wonderful thing, I'm absolutely pro-market economy. But we have to see clearly that the most important macroeconomic prices cannot be left to the market. They have to have responsible government and a competent government, which is the most difficult thing to get. Thank you very much.
Do you want to stay there?
I'm staying here.
I'm very honored to be able to continue with you. Yes, wherever you're comfortable. You don't need. Okay. Very happy to be able to now, hopefully, moderate a discussion with Professor Flassbeck. Very happy to see him here, and he's, I think, held the tradition of the Yusif Sayigh lecture in yet another area that is very far from our daily concerns, but obviously is of pertinence to our situation, even without the third instrument, the third price, which we don't have for the moment in Palestine control over. So, تفضلوا. أي أسئلة أي استفسارات تفضلوا الأول ثم يوسف ثم ريان.